The digital euro is getting closer and closer
to reality, this digital euro. The deadline for us is going to be October of 25.
ECB President Christine Lagarde is currently putting a lot of pressure on the EU Parliament to push through a law on the digital euro, despite resistance from many members of Parliament. Today, I'll show you the supposed advantages of the digital euro, its disadvantages, why the ECB is now applying pressure, what the next concrete steps are, and how you can actually benefit from the digital euro, even in a financial crisis. With that, welcome to Northern Finance. My name is Alex Black. Why is the ECB currently putting so much pressure to introduce the digital euro right now at this time? The answer is simple. Time is running out. After years of preparation, as shown nicely in this diagram illustrating what has been done specifically, the ECB is now very close to its goal of actually introducing the digital euro, a project it has been working on since 2021. But for this introduction, the ECB first needs a green light from the politicians. So far, however, this green light has not been given. The EU legislative process is progressing rather slowly, and ECB President Lagarde is now sounding the alarm.
The deadline for us is going to be October of 25, and we are getting ready for that deadline, but we will not be able to move unless the other parties, the stakeholders, as I call them, Commission, Council and Parliament, actually complete the legislative process, without which we will not be able to move.
It also seems that the ECB has an issue with the fact that Donald Trump considers stablecoins to be a good thing and actively wants to promote them. This may be because most stablecoins, that is, stable cryptocurrencies whose value generally does not fluctuate, like USD based on the US dollar and not, for instance, on the euro. And with their help, getting started with cryptocurrencies can also be made significantly easier indeed. For example, deposits at Binance and similar platforms often take place in USDC, which is naturally a thorn in the side of the ECB since they cannot control it. With the digital euro, as you can see, they want to win this battle.
I've also called on Congress to pass landmark legislation creating simple, common-sense rules for stablecoins and market structure. With the right legal framework, institutions large and small will be liberated to invest, innovate, and take part in one of the most exciting technological revolutions.
And before we continue, let's briefly clarify what the digital euro actually is. The digital euro is intended to become the first official digital currency for all 20 countries in the Eurozone. It is supposed to be free of charge, available both online and offline, and, according to the ECB itself, as secure and anonymous as cash. This claim is open to doubt. For example, the digital yuan, China's central bank digital currency, is linked to the social credit scoria system that rates the population based on how well they behave. And as a result, some people are unable to do certain things, such as buying gasoline, purchasing tickets to travel to other parts of the land, and much more, like gaining access to good schools for their children or obtaining loans. All of that is denied to you if your rating isn't high enough. And not only that, the former head of the Institute for Research on Central Bank Digital Currency in China himself is currently facing heavy criticism because he is allegedly involved in corruption. He took a bribe. Of course, that's extremely bad for the central bank and also for the population, especially when such a major transformation is pushed through with digital money. And regardless of whether there are such corrupt individuals in the ECB right now, given the sheer size of the ECB, there are bound to be some. The digital euro represents an even greater concentration of power at the very top, and it offers corrupt people the potential for abuse of power, and in general also poses a certain risk when there's this concentration, this increased centralization of power compared to before. There is also the potential for deliberately steering people's behavior, for example, encouraging them to buy less meat because it is considered too harmful to the environment, or discouraging other things that politicians or the central bank simply don't approve of. All of this can be done much more effectively with the digital euro than before. In this way, the digital euro can directly prevent you from doing certain things instead of just going through intermediaries like Visa or your local bank. And why are they doing this? What advantages is this supposed to bring us as consumers in the end? According to this flyer from the German Bundesbank about the digital euro, payments are supposed to be simplified. But since I can already pay for everything across Europe within seconds using a Visa or MasterCard debit card, that's not really an advantage for me. The real reason is that they want to reduce their dependence on companies like Visa, MasterCard, PayPal, and other American companies in Europe and have their own independent system. That definitely has advantages for the ECB, but for consumers, the digital euro doesn't really offer anything at first except, and this should be emphasized, though hardly anyone does, unless we enter a financial crisis. In that case, people might trust the ECB more than their own local bank, and they could quickly move their money from their bank to the digital euro. That could be an advantage for consumers during a crisis because these deposits wouldn't be affected by a bank failure, and you could immediately do something else with them instead of having to hope for a government bailout. So that could definitely be a benefit. Offline payments between two people are also supposed to be possible, which is pretty cool, but exactly how that will work hasn't been revealed yet. This is what it's supposed to look like on the right when the digital euro is introduced. We have a screenshot from the banking app, as you can see on the right. At the beginning, there will be an upper limit for the digital euro, how much each citizen can have at most. In this pixelated screenshot from the brochure, it's 300 euros, but there's also talk of 3,000 euros. So the exact amount hasn't been decided yet. However, your balance will definitely be automatically converted into digital euros first, and any amount above this limit will remain in your bank account, just as it did before at your bank. This is being done because otherwise banks would no longer have any customer deposits and would therefore be unable to issue loans themselves. So the ECB is really cutting into the bank's business and will very likely reduce their profitability through the digital euro, as can also be seen in this report from Tagesschau. As previously mentioned, the disadvantages are that the ECB could potentially control your spending to a certain extent, even though they currently insist that they will not do so. We all experienced during the pandemic how quickly laws and regulations and even their interpretations can change. That's why I don't trust the ECB on this point. Another very important point is that negative interest rates could be enforced much more easily this way. If interest rates drop again, as it currently appears they will, then negative interest rates could be imposed on your account. From 2015 to 2022, we had about 7 years of negative interest rates, and it's much harder to enforce them when there is no digital euro. Because if the first 1,000 or 3,000 euros in your account are always in digital euros, then negative interest rates can be imposed much more easily, essentially forcing people to spend their money instead of saving it. And if desired, this could even be directly connected to certain bonuses if you spend the money on the right things, such as an electric car or anything else that politicians specifically want to see from you. The EU Parliament also currently wants to intrude even further into the privacy of its citizens by planning to abolish end-to-end encryption in chats. This means that the government can then look into your chats on apps like WhatsApp, Telegram, Signal, and so on. And for me, that's yet another step in the direction of trusting politicians less. When things like this are being discussed, it just shows a lack of trust, especially when it comes to introducing a new form of money where so much control is concentrated at the very top. Even though the ECB says that the digital euro and cash are supposed to coexist, the EU keeps restricting cash more and more. We all know that very well. For example, through upper limits on how much you can actually spend before a suspicious activity report for money laundering has to be filed, the elimination of the 500 euro note, and much more. So a lot is being done to ensure that less cash is used, because of course you can't monitor anything there or enforce negative interest rates. In my view, it's a rather frightening idea if the state and the central bank can dictate what you are actually allowed to do with your money and what you are not. And producing videos like this one always requires a lot of research and effort. While we honestly don't earn much from it, you have to call it like it is. So if you enjoy it, please make sure to leave me a like and subscribe. That's a huge support if you like what you see. And definitely share the video with your friends as well, so they also know what's coming their way soon, because the preparation phase for the digital euro will be over very soon. Officially, it ends in October or November 2025, and now it's up to the EU Parliament to decide where. As mentioned, the ECB is currently putting pressure on the members of Parliament to push this law through. It's also interesting that the Eurogroup president, Pascal Donohue, chairman of the 20 finance ministers in the Eurozone himself, says that the digital euro now needs to be introduced quickly. Specifically, he says, and I quote, "The ministers feel the urgency of this project. That's why we have indeed agreed to speed up the work and to find compromises on the remaining issues as quickly as possible." End of quote. It's also quite interesting that the member of the EU Parliament, who previously coordinated the draft law on the digital euro, Stefan Berger, stepped down from this position at the end of 2024 because he had concerns about the digital euro. He has now been replaced and things are moving forward. But many other EU parliamentarians also have doubts about the digital euro, especially after the ECB's IT system for the Target 2 payment system recently had a prolonged outage. As a result, 4 out of the 8 groups in the EU Parliament currently have doubts about whether the ECB can actually implement the digital euro. But at the moment, it still looks like they will get a majority for this proposal. The ECB has so far invested at least 1 billion euros to push through the digital euro and is very committed to bringing this to completion now. Let's conclude from this. The ECB is contractually obligated to remain neutral, but as shown at the beginning, it is now getting very actively involved in politics through its president Lagarde, as well as Piero Cipollone, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, a member of the ECB's executive board. He recently called on members of the European Union Parliament, urging them to adopt the digital euro as soon as possible. The ECB's patience really does seem to be running out. And if you want to get involved, you can always simply send an email to your EU or Bundestag representative about it. I assume the digital euro will eventually be introduced simply to reduce the power Americans have over Europe through Visa, MasterCard, PayPal, and the like. In the end, this will offer little to no real benefit to consumers. We can already make real-time transfers across Europe at zero cost. And in my view, the ECB simply wants to gain more power for itself. It claims to be neutral, but when I look at the ECB website's list of responsibilities, I don't see anything about lobbying for its own interests yet. That's exactly what's happening. In the same way, the ECB is also pursuing climate goals, even though it was never given a mandate to do so. And despite all the efforts to claim that the digital euro will respect privacy, that there will be no restrictions on how it can be used, or expiration date by which your money must be spent, I simply no longer believe any of these promises. I have to say it like it is. I mean, it's really a bad idea to give the ECB even more power than it already has as a central bank. And considering the record levels of debt in Europe, which keep rising, from my personal perspective, the risk of abuse of power by politicians and central banks also increases once they have that power. Because if the EU's climate and debt targets are consistently missed, some people at the top might start considering things like putting an expiration date on money, restricting spending on certain items like meat or gasoline, or banning the purchase of cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. A lot of things are conceivable, especially when you're in somewhat difficult situations, which is exactly where we could in fact end up. Whether the digital euro will move forward is up to the EU Parliament, which will decide soon. If they say no, then all of the ECB's plans will be for nothing. They've said if that happens, they'll abandon the project. And if Parliament says yes, the digital euro will launch on a small scale as early as 2026 and then really take off in 2027, let me know your opinion on the digital euro in the comments below. Am I wrong with my criticism? Do you see things the way I do? Let me know below, and go ahead and check out this video of my talk at the investment fair to see how you can earn 15% per year. With that, I wish you good returns and see you next time.